something about the first marathon that was run, but I believe that most of you have only heard part of the story of what took place. The first two decades of the 5th century BC were real game changers as far as this world was concerned. It was there that many of the things changed in most of the civilized world at that time. There were great forces which were coming into conflict. The Persian Empire was a mighty empire at this time. They spanned a huge area. They went from Asia all the way down to Egypt and all the way back up to the area where we call Turkey today. And this huge, huge area of the map, most of the civilized world of its day, was under their control. They were at war with Greece. Now, let me explain to you, first of all, that Greece was not really a country back then. The Greeks had a lot of territory, but they didn't really have an overall authority. They were mostly city nations that made up Greece. A lot of little island nations, a lot of cities across the globe that were under the influence of the Greeks at this time. And they lived in little city-states called polis. This would be their individual groups. In Athens, that was their biggest polis. They had their center of power for the Greek nation, but there was also all these other nations that were part of the Greek Empire as well. For instance, you probably heard of a number of ones like Sparta. Sparta was very different. Sparta kept a king. Sparta always had a king rule over them as a polis, and they were very military-minded, and they're constantly looking for glory in war and constantly training up their troops for war. Well, as Persia began to expand towards Europe, they had to go through the Greek holdings in order to do so. And that was the conflict that was in the beginning of the 5th century BC. They started expanding their empire across where the Greeks were at. At first, they overpowered Ionia, and then after a while, the citizens of Ionia decided to start a revolt and to try to win back their independence again, and they just crushed them in doing so. And as the Persians advanced, they came to the great city of Athens. Now, Athens knew that their city could not field a force to fight the Persians, and so they sent off to the people at Sparta to send their forces to help them to defend their city against the Persians. Now, this is the first place where we see the person involved in the marathon introduced to us. He was a man by the name of Phidippides. And Phidippides took the message from Athens to Sparta to require them to send their troops. He ran for 140 miles. He did so in 36 hours and got to Sparta, and then made the request to the Spartans that they should come and help the Athens. But they told the Athenians that they could not come immediately because of their religious laws. They were going to have to wait for the next full moon before they could send a force. And so Phidippides ran back to Athens with that discouraging message: they're coming, but not in time. They're going to be sending a force. So he ran the 140 miles, and then he ran the 140 miles back. And now Persia was already on top. They were already approaching the city of Athens. They were on a plain not too far away, some 26 miles away. And so the Athenians decide to send their force against them. That very morning that Phidippides got back he put on armor and went with the other Athenians to fight in the battle. They caught the Persians by surprise in what would have normally been a suicide move on their part. They attacked with such force that they killed off thousands of the Persians and only lost 192 men in their attack. And so the Persians turned tail and ran. But the Persians knew that Athens was basically undefended right now, since the force had come out there to meet them on this plain 26 miles away. And so they got on their ships to go to Athens to try to get in behind the army. And you know what happened then? Phidippides was commissioned to run back and warn Athens. He's run 140 miles, then he turned around and ran 140 miles back, and then he fought all day in heavy armor, and now they're sending him back the 26-mile run to Athens to give them the message that the Persians are coming and they better fortify the city for this. And he got there in short order, and he delivered his message, and he died from exhaustion. Phidippides ended up giving everything he had, even to his death, because of his love for his Greek people, for the city of Athens, for the cause. He gave his life. Now we come across the Apostle Paul, and I want to tell you the Apostle Paul was every bit as much of a man who is committed to his cause, a cause that he was giving up his life for, but it was not for any earthly kingdom, any worldly interest, that Paul was pouring out his life. This morning in our text, we come to 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verses 6 through 8 for our text. And there we find these words. For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the course, I have kept the faith. In the future there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing. Our passage this morning reminds us that our lives here are temporary. We are not meant to exist forever in this world. We're only here for a little while. Paul says here, the time of my departure has come. Paul's towards the end of his ministry, and he knows he doesn't have much left of his earthly life here as he writes this passage. He can see the finish line as he's penning this passage here. I think all of us should realize that the end is not that far off for us either. No matter where we're at in our lives right now, we don't have that long in this world. We only have a short time to live in this world. Back in 1979, Frank Kendig and Richard Hutton wrote a book called Lifespans, or How Long Things Last. And here's some of their findings that they recorded in that book. Experts estimate that if a normal cassette tape is played, this is back when they had cassette tapes, played about 100 times a year, sound quality will deteriorate somewhat after 10 years, but the tape itself will play on. A lightning bolt lasts 45 to 55 microseconds. The average running shoe worn by the average runner on the average surface will last 350 to 500 miles. A hard pencil can write up to 30,000 words or draw a line more than 30 miles long. Most ballpoint pens will draw a line 4,000 to 7,500 feet long. Leather combat boots have a wartime lifespan of 6 months, a peacetime lifespan of 8 months. After all, the Army walks during war and peace. The projected lifespan of a baby born in the U.S. today, this is back in 1979, is about 71 years, nearly double what it was at the end of the 18th century. The longest authenticated lifespan of a human being, and of course they don't count the Bible record as authenticated, the longest authenticated lifespan of a human being is 113 years, 214 days. Studies show married people live longer than those who remain single. A group of subatomic particles known as unstable hadrons exist for only 1/100 of a second. That's 10 to the negative 23 seconds. Less time than it takes light to travel a single inch. A 100-watt incandescent bulb will last about 750 hours. A 25-watt bulb, 2,500 hours. The number of times the light bulb is turned on and off has little to do with its lifespan. A $1 bill lasts approximately 18 months in circulation. Practice footballs used by professionals last 2 to 3 days, a playing time of perhaps 5 hours. Home teams are required to provide 24 new balls each game, and these last only about 6 minutes of playing time. Now, to all those things that have been measured and quantified as far as lifespan is concerned, I want to tell you, we don't know how many days that we've been given. Only God has the answer for how many days we will be on this earth. But we do know that our days are short. There are not many in our lives here. Psalm 90 verse 10 says this, "As for the days of our life, they contain 70 years, or if due to strength, 80 years. Yet their pride is but labor and sorrow, for soon it is gone, and we fly away." And in Psalm 103, verses 15 and 16, we see, "As for man, his days are like grass. As a flower of the field, so he flourishes. When the wind has passed over it, it is no more, and its place acknowledges it no longer." There's no sense pretending here that life's going to last forever. It does us no good to block out the fact that our lives are short. Those who are wise learn to accept that we have a limited time here on this planet, a few precious days to accomplish what will come out of our lives. Next thing I want you to see here in this passage is a life lived as an offering. You know, a lot of people, when they think about the span of life, consider their life as a hourglass, with the sand slowly falling, with the passing of days, more and more their life leaches out. It goes from the top chamber where the sand is alive to the bottom where the sand rests. It goes from living to death, and slowly during our lives the sand gets poured out, with death waiting as the grim reaper to harvest us when the last grains have been poured out. Thus our present is ever sliding toward the future extinction. And that's why people fear death. They're looking to the erasure of everything that they have and everything that they know. They're looking to the ultimate loss. It's when time has run out and life is no more. And as much as they want to stop the sand from pouring out, as much as they might try to ignore their lives passing away, time is merciless. And death will reap them at the end. But Paul didn't see his life in those terms. He didn't see his life counting down as in an hourglass. Instead, he saw his life being poured out as a drink offering on the altar to the Lord. There's still that idea in here that our earthly lives are temporary, that we only have so much time here on this earth. But in this case, as Paul's considering himself to be a drink offering, it's not life which has been stolen from him, life which he cannot recover, life which is being destroyed, life which is going down to emptiness. Instead, it's a life being offered up to God. With every passing day, he's being poured out for God's sake. He's applying more of his life to the Lord's purposes. Each passage of his time, each and every day, was freely offered up to God in his life. He would be doing God's purposes, investing his day in doing what God intended that he should do. Brothers and sisters, our life is being poured out every day. We have less time in this world. Every day we have less time in this world. Whether that portion will be stolen from us in a grim march toward an unwanted death, or used by us as a precious gift to God, is entirely up to us. Countdown clock or drink offering, it's our choice. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 15 and the beginning of verse 16 says this: "Therefore, be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time." There is no better use of our time than that we should give our all for him who gave his all for our sake. The wisest investment, the best use of our temporary lives, is to use them up for him. Romans chapter 12, verse 1 says this: "Therefore I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship." A living sacrifice. Our lives offered up. Our lives being poured out for his sake. Now, I want to tell you this morning. We don't accidentally find ourselves to be sacrifices for God. There's no way that you stumble into that. That is an intentional decision on the part of the person that has made themselves a drink offering to God. They have determined that their life is going to count for him. They've determined that they're going to belong to him, body and soul. And that's the only way that we will be living sacrifices for him, is if we have made that choice to live that way for him. And there's something beautiful about a life so devoted that one will give his all for another. It's said that Cyrus, the founder of the Persian army, the Persian Empire, once captured a prince and his family. And he had the prince brought before him. And he said to the prince, "What will you give me for your release? What will you give me for your freedom?" The prince said, "Half of everything I own I will give to you." Cyrus asked him then, "Well, what would you give for the freedom of your children?" The prince said to him, "Everything I have, absolutely everything, I will give to you if you'll free my children." And then Cyrus asked him, "And what will you give for your wife's freedom?" And the prince said to him, "You can have everything, including my life, if you'll let her go free." And Cyrus was very moved by that man's dedication to his family. And he decided to free them all without cost. And on his way home, the prince turned to his wife and said, "Didn't you think Cyrus was a remarkably handsome man?" And his wife said to him, "I wouldn't know. I only had my eyes on the man that would give everything for me." The most beautiful thing we can do with our life is to live it totally sold out for God. And how beautiful are we in the eyes of God when we say, "Everything I have is yours. Every part of my being belongs to you. I will gladly lay down my life. I will pour it out for your sake in this world. The best thing we can do with our lives is to give it up for our God. One other thing I wanted you to see on our text this morning, that is, poured out does not mean destroyed. Back in this passage we see Paul's life is poured out but not destroyed. Paul, having poured out his life for the Lord, did not see the end of his earthly days approaching him with his end of his existence on this earth. Having given to the Lord all of his earthly existence, all of his earthly time, he expected that there would be victory for him beyond the grave, beyond the finish line, just as God had promised. Therefore, he concludes our text with these words: in the future there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing. Our expectation needs to be on our reward beyond this world. We shouldn't have our expectations on what we can gain in this world, because this world's temporary anyway. If we live for this world only, that's a recipe for disaster, because we can't hold on to life here. It's running away from us. But if we invest all we have right now for him, if we're willing to be used up for his service, we will discover a life that is eternally secure in him. We will find life in abundance that never fades, never fails in his presence someday. And so we come to our invitation this morning. I ask you simply this: what are you living for? Don't allow your life to slip away. Live your life with purpose. Give your all to the Lord, and you won't regret that. Not a day of your life in this world, and not a day in eternity either. If you'd like to claim Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, if you have another decision that you'd like to make this morning, we want you to have an invitation time.